In last week's video, we took a look at how to avoid the tenant from hell. How often I have seen, and realtors included in this, a person who would buy a rental property, maybe a second rental property, rent it out, and things go along fine, but over the years, the property value goes up, the rent pays down the mortgage, and now they've got a chunk of equity in that property. And then along comes a bad tenant, maybe a second bad tenant. And they look at that and they think, you know, I don't need the aggravation and I've got all this equity in my property. I think I'll sell it. They put it on the market, they sell it, they realize a chunk of cash, and the problem's gone. But so is the property. Now they don't have an investment portfolio. They don't have the hope of long-term passive income when they retire. And the money that they receive, it isn't too long till they've spent that. What they have got is a story. And you can bet when they're with their children or their grandchildren and they drive by that property, they'll say, you see that property over there? I used to own it at one time. Worst mistake I ever made was to sell it. But they got a story. I don't want that to happen to you. And the single biggest reason why it happens is because of a bad tenant. And as I said last week, you can't guarantee you won't get a bad tenant. But there's some things that you can do to help mitigate the risk. As a landlord, you're looking for a tenant who's going to do three things. You want a tenant who's going to look after the place, you want a tenant who's going to pay the rent, and you want a tenant who's going to be long-term. And you've got to, from the applicants, from the people who look at the unit, you've got to decide who is that best fit right tenant. And that's sometimes hard to do. It's sometimes hard to read people. They don't always end up being what they appear to be. I have a friend, she was married at one time, and she told me the story. She said she was dating Mr. Right. It was a wonderful experience. He was a fabulous guy, thoughtful, caring. They enjoyed so many things together. They finally decided a date, got married. She said it was a fairy tale wedding. Even the honeymoon was wonderful. But she said, when we got home, as we're crossing the threshold, he said to me, now that the wedding's behind us, the honeymoon's behind us, I want to set it straight what my expectations are. And he laid down the law. This is where you can go and where you can't go. I expect this from you. I expect that. I want to see your phone, see who you're talking to. When you're vacuuming, I want to see all the lines in a certain way. I want the groceries all put in this way. And he laid down the law. He was a very different person after he crossed the threshold. And there's a lot of tenants the same way. They're very different after they cross the threshold. They know what you're looking for, and they can be that person when they're being interviewed because they want to rent the unit, but it's not really who they are. And so it's very important when you go over the application form, go over it very, very carefully, and then talk to them. Sit down face to face, or at least by phone, and get your general impression. And you're going to get that general impression by going through the holes and the things that are missing in the application form. Sometimes what's not said is more important than what's said. And by the way, they answer your questions. And I want to talk to you about your communication with landlords. I've had a situation more than once where the tenant has had friends posing to be a current or a past landlord, and they're not really a landlord at all. And of course, they're going to answer all the questions. They're going to pay them in the best light. And you can find that out by asking a lot of questions. There's questions you want to ask anyway. You want to ask that past landlord how long they were with you. Were you in the unit while they were there? Would you rent to them again? Did they pay the rent on time? But you also want to ask, how much was the rent? When did they move in? When did they move out? And if it's the landlord, he can give you the accurate answer. If it's something posing to be the landlord, then he's going to get tripped up. And if the answers don't line up with the application, with the information you've been given, walk away. Very, very important that you ask enough questions to find out whether it's really the landlord and find out. And I've had landlords that are trying to cover their current landlord because he wants to get rid of them, but a past landlord, he just wants to be nice. But when you drill down and drill down, you find out, no, I wouldn't rent to them again. Well, why not? Well, because of this and because of that. And you get the answer that you're looking for. So the more questions, the clearer the picture comes. And don't be afraid, and don't be afraid to investigate further. Go to Geo Warehouse and find out whether the person that they're purporting to be the landlord is the person who owns the property. And Sometimes you need to go beyond the questions that you ask them and do a little more due diligence. I had one where the landlord was a management company, and all they would do is confirm that the tenant was there and paid the rent. So I said to the tenant, if you don't mind, I'd like to come by and visit you in your apartment. On another occasion, I went over to their house where they were living, and actually 2 or 3 times I did that. And in the case where I went to the apartment, I got there and it was immaculate. The lady was looking after it wonderfully. I rented to her and she's still a tenant of mine. On another case, I drove by the house. I didn't even need to go in. Outside was weeds a foot high, junk all over the place. That was where they were renting. And you can bet if that's how they're keeping that place, that's how they're going to keep my place. Another occasion, it was a fellow realtor that was renting to them, and he answered all the questions properly, but I sensed the hesitancy in his voice. There was something that was amiss. So I contacted the tenant, and I said, if you don't mind, I'd like to come over and visit you in your apartment. Well, I got there. He met me in the door and said, let's go to a coffee shop. I said, no, I want to meet you in your living room. I went inside. The bathtub was full of car parts. There was a transmission on the floor in the living room. In the kitchen, the ceiling was falling down. There was plaster on the floor. And the interesting thing, you could say, well, that wasn't his fault that the ceiling fell down. No, but he didn't sweep the floor up. And that's how he lived. And you can bet that if I had rented to him, that's how my place would look before too long. Do your due diligence. Now, what if they own their own property and they've sold it? Well, you can't talk to a past landlord, but you can talk to the realtor. Find out from the realtor who had the property listed how it showed, why they're selling it. Maybe that there's a marriage breakup and each one needs their own apartment, and that may be a wonderful, wonderful tenant for you. But find out, first of all, what their property was like, how they were to work with. Talk to the realtor who had it listed. So the more homework you can do before you make a decision, the better your chances are of getting a good tenant, one that will end up with a long-term, happy relationship. A tenant who pays the rent, looks after the property, and is there for the long haul. I hope that makes sense. I want to thank you very much for investing your time watching this video.